Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, best of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site that covers the Arizona Cardinals, episode 618, with my co-host, Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com. And unfortunately, Seth, we were not able to talk about a fifth straight win. It definitely was not the way I predicted it. It was far more the type of game you predicted, as you had the Seahawks win, what was it, 2017. The Seahawks actually beat the Arizona Cardinals, snapping the 4-game winning streak that they had, 16-6, making the Cardinals and tying the Cardinals and Seahawks at 6-5. But with that head-to-head, it just made the division super complicated, as now Seattle is back in first place, Seth. I guess it was, they were due to have a game like this, weren't they?
Yeah, and it was just disappointing how it happened. I mean, because as we'll discuss, like the strength of the team, was really shut down, and that was a surprise. And there's a lot of questions that have to be answered about that. But, for right now, it is what it is. And we got to, readjust again, like, hey, they're still ahead of schedule. They're not supposed to be competing for NFC West championships this season, and so the fact that they are, we gotta take that with a grain of salt and enjoy it for what it is, and then kind of refocus on, hey, they're still truly in control of their own destiny within the division, and that's really what matters. The problem becomes, and we talked about it last week, like they virtually, it's not impossible, but it's very improbable that they earn any type of playoff berth with outside of winning the division, because we talked about the tiebreaker situation in the wild card, and now they get the other wild card team in this upcoming week, which we may or may not preview depending on our schedules. But this whole situation is odd because, all it would take is a win, and we'd be discussing like, hey, not only do they control their own destiny, but they basically control the division. And instead now it's like,
it's messy.
Yeah, you technically still control your own destiny, but you got to win some games that we didn't know if they were going to be able to win anyway. So, it'll be interesting to see how this all comes about. But yeah, this was not completely unexpected, was it?
No, it wasn't. But, what does it mean? It just means that had they won this game, they'd have had a 2-game lead over the entire division. They would be 3-0 in the division games. But now it puts them in a position that whether or not they win this week, a win would be fantastic, but it makes their game against Seattle in 2 weeks an absolute 100% must win, because they need. I've always don't have any head-to-head type, or you always need 3 division wins. You need to at least beat each division team once. Had they done that, they would have been super in control of the division.
Especially with how the rest of the division fell out that weekend.
It was the perfect weekend. Like the only team that dropped the ball was the Cardinals, because as we were looking at, I was like, they could have just like Arizona State. So I'm a huge Arizona State fan. Last weekend was the perfect weekend for Arizona State because Kansas beat Colorado, ASU knocked off ASU knocked off BYU and put them in first place in the Big 12. And now basically they got all the help that they needed. The Cardinals, if they had beaten the Seahawks, they got the help that they need, that the entire division, they would be at 7-4. And then the rest of the division is at 5-6. Now it looks like a dogfight the way on the rest of the way. And for me, the one thing I'm starting to worry about in terms of, I think the Cardinals still, the way they were playing, I think they'll find themselves and ultimately win the division because they have the easiest schedule down the stretch. But Seattle's schedule isn't far from that either.
No, but the only good thing about it is for Seattle versus Arizona is that Seattle doesn't play San Francisco, who looks completely lost at this point.
Yeah.
And they do still play, obviously, Arizona, as you've talked about, and then LA. And both of those teams have still been formidable. I mean, again, like this was definitely what you would call a frustrating loss, but at the same time, it wasn't what the losses were earlier this year where you're like, oh, this team's garbage, right? Like you go, oh, there's one or two things that need to get fixed that allows this team to win this game, as opposed to earlier in the season when they just got, blown out by Washington and Green Bay, where you're like, oh, this team's just not a good football team. And so that is a good, kind of saving grace takeaway from what was mostly a bad day. And so, I think that's the way you have to look at it. Like it's unfortunate. It sucks. I don't want to say I was right because I undersold how much more physical Seattle would be. Apparently I did not expect that. I don't think either of us expected them to be that much more of the physical team. But at the same time, like the Cardinals aren't a good enough team in the sense of talent that they can maintain a long string of really, high level play. And that's not trying to take away from what they've accomplished or what they've done. But like, again, that 4-game win streak, they beat a Chargers team that's not bad. They beat a Dolphins team that's turning it around and looking more and more like the team everybody expected. Remember, after the Cardinals beat them, they were 2-5. They barely lost to Buffalo the next week, and then they've won 3 in a row. So it's not like they beat the Bears and the Jets. Now they beat the Bears. They did beat the Bears and the Jets. They beat the Bears and the Jets handily. Like you as a good team you do, right? And that was kind of what we were looking at and kind of excited about, is like, oh, they beat good teams and then they bludgeoned bad teams. But at the same time, I don't think it's surprising to see them kind of fall back down to earth just a touch.
Honestly, I guess it was probably too much to expect a 5th straight win, right?
Well, not just but it's not just a 5th straight win. It's something that they haven't done yet, and this group as a whole hasn't done yet, right? And it's another division game. It's being the hunted now, right? Like they were in first place, they were in control, and they were the favorites. I mean, Jess, when was the last time the Cardinals were road favorites? I genuinely don't remember. Like maybe 2021, maybe,
unless they were playing an absolute I can't remember, but unless they were, I guess the last 2 years they were garbage. So
yeah.
So
I just feel like sometimes, and I'm not saying this is the case, but sometimes expectations can consume a team, and then they don't reach what that goal is. And that kind of seemed what it was this week, is that they weren't able to get going or get on track at all. And it was something that you and I talked about, right? Like this was a winnable game in the sense of their strength lined up against their opponent's weakness. And the result was the opponent controlling that and being able to really control the game and the narrative. And that was, that's the reality of it. This was just, this was their worst offensive performance of the season. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Their defense played good enough to win, but there were still some issues.
Yeah. And we'll talk about, we're going to talk about both sides of the ball.
Right.
My question is this: a win would have had the confidence super high. What is your confidence level in the Cardinals now when you look at the last look at the last 6 games of the season? How confident are you in them to take that division?
Well, I think they're still able to, kind of do what we said, right? Which was win the next, win 2 of 3 in this 3-game stretch. They've just made it much more difficult for themselves now, right? Like,
yeah,
now they have to win on the road against, the second best team record wise in the NFC. And then they have to beat the team that just beat them at home. So like those are 2 very tough games. So confidence wise, nothing's changed. I think that they still have the best track to make the playoffs, but at the same time, everything changes when you lose a division game and now the other team has the upper hand in just terms of tiebreaker.
Yeah. For me, like a win would have, like, I was pretty confident before. Had they won that game, I'd have been like 100%. They're on their way to the division, and I think a win over Seattle would have catapulted them to more wins. I am, with the loss now, I'm more like 60% confident that they're going to pull it off, because for a couple of reasons. One, some things worried me from the game offensively, and 2, what is my greater worry is that the Mike McDonald defense for Seattle is finally clicking, because we talked about they hadn't allowed more than 20 points in any of their wins, and they hadn't allowed fewer than 26 points in any of their losses. So they've been able to put things together, they did that defense, and we're going to talk about it in just a minute. But Seattle's defense came to play, and maybe it was as simple as retooling their linebackers, because they have the talent on the defensive line. They have the talent in the secondary. They went budget with their linebackers, and it cost them early in the year with Jerome Baker and Tyrell Dodson. And now neither one of those are on the team. And they added Ernest Jones, a very good linebacker, a volume guy, tackles up galore, and Tyrese Knight has been doing. And suddenly they made the Cardinals a very good rushing team against the Seattle team, a bad rushing defense team. Suddenly, with those 2 guys at linebacker the last 2 weeks, is that the run game hasn't been a problem for Seattle. So if that is the case, that's why my confidence level in the Cardinals, I think they have the easier path. But I think things change if that defense suddenly becomes good. Like they were inconsistent. If they've become good, then I think they've got the chops to, because they're scrappy. Geno Smith is savvy. He's smart. He threw an interception, but I caught the next gen numbers from Zebra Technologies. He didn't do anything special at all. In fact, he had like the least difficult thing among what we saw from any quarterback in the league. I got to pull that up. Zebra Technologies. He finished with the lowest average, 5.2 yards intended air yards, the lowest of the week. 3.8 average completed air yards, the second lowest, and just 3.2% of his pass attempts were considered aggressive. the second lowest. That if the defense is playing well, Geno Smith can play caretaker, and I think that will lend itself to the effective Geno that we've seen previous to this year, when he's had to do too much, which is what's happened with the defense so far. That's different, and so he's having to force things, tips, things like that, and it's not as productive. But that's my issue with the confidence level, is that I think if Seattle's defense has come around, then I'm far less confident about what the Cardinals have, especially if they win the next two games. If as long as they beat Seattle, in the second one, I will feel much better, because I think even if they lose two straight, I think they're on track to win at least three in a row if they beat Seattle plus Carolina plus New England. And then, going to the last week, the last 2 weeks with 9 wins, able to lock things down. But yeah.
Yeah, and this is like I said, this was a tough one coming into it, and so it's not surprising to see them lose this game. I just think, like you said, it's a little disappointing on how they lost it, and we'll get to that in the next segment, right?
Yes. So coming next on the Rise of Sierra podcast, but our Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move and talk about the offense. What are takeaways for what we saw offensively of the Cardinals before we go to the defensive side of the ball? That's coming next on Rise of Sierra. We're back on the Rise of Sierra podcast, but our Cardinals talk on the web, talking about the offensive performance of the Cardinals, which it was frankly, it was bad, because, you look at Kyler's numbers, they weren't good. They weren't horrific. In fact, you can look at the offensive performance, and I think there were really two bright spots. One, that was Kyler, and that wasn't super bright, and then Trey McBride. Trey McBride was a monster, but then everything else was pretty not great.
Yeah, it was tough, man. And you look at Kyler's performance, and there was some good and positive in it, but it really skews the fact, or kind of, shines the fact that this team is built on being able to run the ball and use play action pass to set up everything else. And the irony of the situation is this was probably one of his worst performances of the season, and it was, like you said, it wasn't even really a bad performance. There was two bad misses,
yes,
throws wise, but it wasn't even a bad performance as much as it was just an average performance, and something we haven't seen from him this season. But the reality becomes that this team just absolutely cannot and does not win consistently if their run game doesn't work. And
and they shut down the run game. James Conner, 8 yards. His long was 4. He struggled. But I think it comes down to this. Leonard Williams completely wrecked. I don't know where this Leonard Williams had been all year for Seattle, but he 100% absolutely wrecked this game. He made both guards look terrible, in fairness, and there was the one. In fact, there was the -4 run play when they were in scoring position. I think it's what set up the field goal.
Yeah.
Williams knew what was coming, because if you watch the replay, the Paris Johnson's job was to pin him, but if you catch just the 2 seconds before the snap, Williams shifted to his left 2 steps, and that was enough distance to make it that Paris couldn't get to him quickly enough to seal him off for Conner. Williams knew that was just, he was locked in. He had as good a defensive lineman performance you're going to see. 6 tackles, 2.5 sacks. He had 3 tackles for loss, 4 quarterback hits, and he tipped a pass as well. Like if there was one player who absolutely wrecked things, it was Leonard Williams, because the Cardinals had been getting pretty good guard play. Tristan Colon looked bad, and that was the worst game he had. Jonah Williams' return, like people were saying, he didn't play great, but there was nothing egregious about his play, in my opinion. Paris had the holding call. I didn't love the holding call, but it took points off the board because they had a touchdown and ended up not getting a touchdown. And so, like, if we go back to like week 4, when the Cardinals had perhaps their worst offensive line performance of the year, combined with Washington's best defensive line or front seven performance of the year, this was that again. They were completely overmatched by Seattle's front seven.
Yeah, and it was just disappointing to see it that way. The other thing that we saw, Jess, that was difficult and kind of frustrating to watch was that was one of the things that you and I talked about, right? Like, I don't know if there's anybody. I mean, I'm sure there's somebody, probably a relative or not, but that thinks that Kelvin Beacham's better than Jonah Williams, right? It's I don't want to say it's obvious, but Jonah's still in his prime. Kelvin's on the back end of a very, very good NFL career, very successful, long time NFL career. And this was the concern with the move. It wasn't necessarily that you're not putting your better player in. I was actually talking to some buddies about this. The reality of it was you're creating, I don't want to say an issue, but you're creating something that didn't have to happen at that point. But the other thing is, and I'd love to get the inside truth to this, and we'll never ever know, but like, you're basically planning for the future, right? You're like, hey, Jonah's our guy. Like, Jonah is going to be
he worked his tail off to get back,
right? And he's in our long-term plans. And again, it's never going to come out, but you probably are saying to yourself, we're not going to win a Super Bowl this year, right? Like, we're a playoff team, but we're probably not going to compete for a Super Bowl. So let's get Jonah and this offensive line as close to what we're going to have next year, right? It's going to be Paris. It's probably going to be Evan Brown. It's probably going to be Yelda Holt. It's probably going to be Jonah Williams, and then you'll figure out that right guard spot, right? And so it's like, let's get this guy back in it. Let's get the rhythm and find that continuity for this group, as opposed to if you're the team, if you're 8-2 going into that game, or 9-1, you probably are like, we're not going to make any changes. Like, yeah, we paid Jonah, and yeah, he's our guy next year, but we're not gonna upset the apple cart, right? Whereas this, and again, this is nothing against Kelvin or anything like that, but like with this, you're like, it's been a very good season. We feel like we can come out of this quickly if there is a little bit of a funk due to the change. We'll be fine. And I do wonder if that kind of played into it, because again, I don't think anybody would disagree who the better player is, right?
Right.
But you can't. I mean, there's literally no denying how good this offensive line had played in the last 4 games. I mean, it was one of the better units in the league. And so again, like you said, Jonah's game was average, if unremarkable, but how much did Jonah's presence change things for Cologne, who hadn't looked bad the whole time, right? Like, it was actually one of the things we talked about quite a bit. Is like, wow, Tristan Cologne's, again, not playing out of this world, but he's definitely holding his own.
Yeah.
And so yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, at least with it did change. And if you were looking at game plan, right, I'm sure the Cardinals thought they were going to run the ball more. If there was one area that was slightly weaker in Kelvin Beacham's play, like if you go by PFF, I don't love their grades because I don't know what it means. It's just a number, but he was a far better pass protector than a run blocker. Jonah Williams is a great run blocker. He didn't do as well in pass protection. And if they had intended on, I mean, they came out and they, another thing, holy crap, Mark Sanchez is hard. Like, what? Mark Sanchez is a color analyst. Stop. I think, yes, the Cardinals were passing the ball early, but I'm sure that it had to do with the loaded box that Seattle added. Jonah had 2 pressures allowed in the game against Seattle. But he did have a higher run blocking grade than we had seen from Kelvin Beacham for most of the games this year. And so I get that, but that is true. It could have impacted Cologne because at the beginning of the year, Cologne had never played next to Jonah Williams because it was Will Hernandez. And so perhaps communication there. Well, and I'll say this, my good Leonard Williams, we know how good Leonard Williams is. And I put the offensive line performance, I simply bow down, tip my cap to the play of Williams. He's played out of his mind.
Yeah, and that's the thing, exactly. Like I don't necessarily know if going back to Williams was the reason for this to occur, but I do know that there were struggles in this game that we haven't seen, and I think just again a lot of it came straight from the fact that like this was going to be a new, basically a brand new start, a brand new offense. I mean, remember, Jonah Williams has played a half with
a quarter. He played a quarter.
Right. So it's like this was brand new for everybody involved, including Williams. And Williams individually didn't grade poorly, but it was by far the worst performance from an offensive line for the Cardinals since that Washington game. And so, those are the things that they'll have to overcome if they want to win the division. And that was just, that's just the reality of what this offense is. And again, the passing numbers were fine. The passing game was okay. There were, the most sacks we've seen since the Washington game. They didn't do a great job getting time for Kyler, and
the interior pressure was consistent.
Yeah,
in that game.
And then they had, like you said, they had the penalties, they had issues, and that's again, we'll chalk it up to one game. The thing that stands out is that if this team doesn't run the ball well, there's not a good offense.
No.
And that is obviously by design, right? Like they have big targets in Marvin Harrison, Michael Wilson, and Trey McBride, but those targets are guys that can win, ironically, except for McBride, and not his fault 90% of the time, are guys that can win in the red zone, right? And that can go up and win jump balls and win 50-50 balls and things of that nature. And that's what they don't have the speedsters. They don't have the deep threat quite yet. And they're, but the reality is their deep passing game is predicated on being able to run play action.
Yeah.
And if nobody's respecting your play action because you're running for less than 50 yards in a game, then it's gonna be a long day.
Yeah, well, ultimately, the Cardinals, like we saw against Miami, they don't have to run the ball fantastically, but if they are completely shut down, it makes life so incredibly difficult. And the lack of a run game is well, they can think about this way. They had 49 rushing yards, and 14 of those yards came from Amari DiMercato when they had a 3rd and 20 essentially.
Right. When that
just ran the draw play to try and get some. Although when he had that handoff, when he took that handoff, I'm like, oh, is it happening again? Because
By the way, we also have to comment on, and I know he just missed a field goal, but this was by far the most uneven performance we've seen from Chad Ryland.
Yes.
And so it was almost like, oh my gosh, everything that could go wrong.
Yes. They were terrible on third down. About Kyler, I thought Kyler played fine. 2 plays. I think there were 2 plays that kind of broke the team. One was obviously the interception. I've heard some of the reactions to it. I'm like, honestly, the actual interception, like the throw he made, it wasn't a bad decision because it was like Jonathan, it was a gotta have. It was a 4th and 1. He shouldn't have had to run to make that throw that they didn't have that out, because how many times have we seen anybody stop Kyler from getting to the corner? We've basically never seen it. Devin Witherspoon sniffed it out. He played it perfectly, and Kyler was in a position where he's like, I'm not going to get the first down. I've got to make a play. He had Michael Wilson open. Wasn't a bad choice to make that throw. How many times have we seen him? How many times have we seen Patrick Mahomes do something or Josh Allen do something like that? The fact of the matter is just the throw was bad. The decision that wasn't bad. The throw was bad. It was way over Wilson's head, and then it got picked off. In any other normal scenario, that's actually a slightly better outcome than getting tackled before the first down, because, field position wise, since it was 4th down, you would have basically had like a 10-yard punt. The problem was that it was returned 69 yards for the touchdown. That's ultimately, it was the result that was bad, not the decision. The execution, this wasn't a case of like in the playoff game, the no-look pass from the end zone which, by the way, we've seen other quarterbacks. We've seen Matthew Stafford do it. We've seen so many bad throws. We've seen Patrick Mahomes make dummy throws like that. Josh Allen's done it.
Josh Allen does it like once every 2 games.
But so I don't like, it's just the result was terrible. The throw was poorly made, and then of course the other thing, when he missed Trey McBride, when he threw it too high to Trey McBride at the end zone, that's a throw he can't miss, and he's done that twice this year to McBride in the end zone, and then there's been one where it's McBride they can't connect in the end zone. Tyler's missed and they had a bad throw twice. McBride's dropped one himself. It's going to connect at some point, and then of course we have to say the bright spot was Trey McBride sending a career high 12 catches for 133 yards. He was a monster, and he's so good. He's incredibly good. And he's going to be expensive here. He's going to get expensive.
I mean, good problems to have, right?
It is. Coming up next on the Rise of Seahawks podcast, best our Cardinals talking about. So we went to the defensive side of the ball. Some positives, but still not good enough. That's coming up next on Rise of Seahawks. We're back on the Rise of Seahawks podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web, talking about the defensive side of the ball. If you look at the raw numbers defensively, the Cardinals had a very good game. They only gave up 285 yards total. They only allowed 65 rushing yards. They had a turnover. They picked off Geno Smith once. That was a critical and great play by Garrett Williams. You've said it. You've said it before. I mean, Garrett Williams is quietly becoming a great player. They had 5 sacks. I mean, Dante still, we're starting to see a little production. Like, Jesse Luquettas had a sack for the 3rd straight week after never having a sack ever. Zaven got credit for one, the forced fumble. LJ Collier had a sack. The pass rush is a little bit there. The coverage is pretty good. They had one bad play on defense, and that was the Jackson Smith and Jigba, the 46-yard play that got them down to the goal to go situation. And that was, they brought Buddha on the blitz, and that left a hot in that spot. Rabbit was probably just out of place because, had he been placed better, he would have been slightly more to the middle of the field. Probably Jalen Thompson plays, I would guess, because Jalen Thompson basically in his entire career has rubbed out those type of plays. And when they made that dump off, it was just green field in front of them because they sent 6. The Cardinals sent 6, and he just dumped it off, and the rest were in coverage. And so outside of that, they had the 46-yard play. There was a dump off to Kenneth Walker. But other than that, they did a pretty good job, except on third down because, and I think that was the result of just kind of being in third and short. But Seattle went 7 for 14 on third down. And that was basically, it came down to it, is that the Cardinals defensively did the job that they needed to do, but didn't get enough help offensively. If they play like this defensively every game the rest of the year, I'd say the Cardinals would probably win 5 out of those 6 games.
Yeah, the biggest issues they had in this game, and let's start with the positive. Garrett Williams is a budding superstar. Max Melton actually did look good. Zaven Collins had probably his best game as an Arizona Cardinal. I mean, those were all positives. I thought, and then like you said, the raw numbers looked really good. Here was the problem with the defense, and this is genuinely probably just as much as why they lost the game as the offense's inability to get consistency going. They missed 24 tackles in the game.
Oh, that's so bad.
And the ones that were missing them were big misses. Budda Baker had 5 missed tackles. He probably played his worst game he's played, and we've been talking about how good Budda's been this year, right? And he probably had his worst game this season, maybe probably since last season. He struggled making plays, and that was
true. He was there, but he wasn't.
Missed. Yeah.
He'd miss. Like normally, like you see him, he makes every tackle, and they slipped by him a few times.
Yeah, Mac Wilson and Xavier Thomas both missed sacks.
Oh, jeez. Those the Mac Wilson should have had a safety. Xavier Thomas, yeah, I don't know what happened with him on that one play.
LJ Collier had a sack, and he probably should have had another one, right? Like those are the things in this game that really turn the tide of things, because instead of having big plays or forcing punts or things like the Seahawks were able to extend, they were able to do other things. And like the reality becomes this was just a tough game overall, where the defense made plays when they needed to, especially in the red zone, as we've talked about, right? But like they lacked, again, the ability to make plays before that. And that, I think, ultimately is what ended up costing them the game, is that, you look at especially those second half drives, right? Like coming out of the half, you get a nice long drive where they drain, 4 minutes off the clock before they punt. They had a pass interference on that one from Starling Thomas. I thought it was pass interference, don't you? I mean, wouldn't you agree?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. It was
But then
it was frustrating, but
think about this. They get the sack, right? They get the sack of Geno, and he fumbles, and it's on the ground for 3 seconds before anybody notices it. and they recover, and they're able to punt, right? So instead of the Cardinals getting the ball back at the 40-ish, they punt, and now they take over at the 18. That's a huge difference. The next series that they come out there, again, they get the ball with 5 minutes to go in the third quarter, and they punt with 14:51. So 6 minutes of game or over 5 minutes of game time. And again, plenty of chances to make plays, to do something, and they're unable to. And that's where just, they had opportunities, they just missed them. And we said the same thing about the offense, right? And the nail in the coffin one was obviously the final drive.
Oh, that 8-minute
drive where they
got that field goal. It made it impossible.
Score game, and so all of those things, all played into it, and it's and that's where it's truly a combined effort. But the reality was this game was lost up front when the offensive line couldn't do anything. And then this game was lost in the fact that the Cardinals, even though they played well, they didn't make the big plays that were necessary to really change the outcome of the game. And those are just how that game went. It's unfortunate because I thought they played well enough to win.
They did. Like
defensively,
they did. That's as good a performance as I think we can expect from the Cardinals. As we've said, this is a defense that requires discipline and effort. They don't have flashy talent to be able to make big plays, and so they just have to stick to their jobs and be very disciplined. And I think they did that. The problem is, if they play that well, if the Cardinals can score one touchdown, they score one touchdown, and they don't miss that field goal at the end. But this is a team like the Cardinals, you would expect them to score 2 touchdowns a game, right? It's reasonable. This is an offense that should score 2 touchdowns and 2 field goals a game. Okay, at least 20. There's 20 points is little. If you can score 20 points, your defense only gave up 10. They should have won.
Right, and that's how it should be. But this was a game where they were just unable to make the play that they had to make to win the game on either side of the ball. And that's what it comes down to. When you have opportunities, you have to make sure that you take advantage of them, and they just lack that ability in this game. So it's unfortunate.
And that's just classic Seahawks Cardinals game, isn't it? Doesn't it feel like that when it's either you never get like the in-between. It is either a mucky, gross game like this, or it is no defense at all, and they're just moving the ball up and down the field at will. It seems that's how it is. And I was going with the idea that the Cardinals offense would roll, but that defensive line was a buzzsaw for them, so they got really mucky, and the Cardinals just didn't quite have enough to do that. And so they're where they're at now, 6-5, technically in second place. And now, you worry a little bit more, and now they've got the Minnesota Vikings on the road this week. Although, that defense took a hit as Ivan Pace has been placed on injured reserve. So that defense has taken a hit, and we'll have to wait and see on Cam Robinson. They might be on their 3rd left tackle of the year. But that, I think, will wrap up this edition of the Rise Is Here podcast. I know I will have one preview show. I should be recording with Vikings Wire's Andrew Harbaugh this week, and then Seth and I will see about the later in the week because, with Thanksgiving and stuff, it might be hard to pull off. But at minimum, we've got this in the bag. We've got at least one more show this week. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Ruth. This is Rise Is Here podcast. Thanks for listening. As always, we'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be red, see red, and of course, Rise up, see red.